Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event on Mission Ready, Effortless Hybrid Cloud Mobility Within Reach. Today's webinar is sponsored by Pure Storage and AWS and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'll be your moderator today. I'm with Actual Tech Media. And before we get to today's great content, there are a few things that you should know. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the question box in our webinar control panel. While we won't have a live Q&A at the end of this event, we do have team members standing by to address your questions in the chat during the event. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There's a link to getting started with Pure Storage. You'll also see a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, where you can find more events like this one. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and with your colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for this prize. We recognize that some of you work for organizations that don't allow you to accept prizes. If that's the case for you, or if you want to donate the value of the gift card, we work with several great charitable organizations. Thanks to generous prize winners on previous Actual Tech Media events, thousands of dollars have been donated to those organizations. So thank you in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have that special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card. This one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. Our presenter is Wendy Stussrud, Vice President of Global Partner Sales at Pure Storage. And Wendy will be emceeing most of the event today. As for the agenda, she'll spend the first 20 minutes leading a panel discussion with Henry Axelrod, Partner Solutions Architect at AWS, and John Owings, Director of Cloud Architecture at Pure Storage. So there's going to be lots of great technical and business information in there. After that discussion, Wendy is going to bring on our special guest, Carey Lohrenz, one of the first F-14 Tomcat fighter pilots with the US Navy. That's going to be a great discussion as well, and I'm really looking forward to it. Finally, we'll have our prize drawing, so be sure to stick around for that at the end. With that, I will turn things over to Wendy to get us started.
In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists, but first let me set the stage a bit. We all recognize an ongoing enterprise shift to hybrid cloud solutions with the goal to enable apps and data to move seamlessly between multiple on-prem and public cloud environments. But differences in app architectures, management tools, consumption models, and data services can make this journey difficult sometimes. Together, AWS and Pure bring cloud-like agility and seamless data mobility to improve your cloud TCO and deliver an experience that keeps your end users productive. Now, with that backdrop, let me introduce our panel speakers. First, I'd like to welcome John Owings, or JO, as we refer to him here at Pure, Director of Cloud Infrastructure. Welcome, John, or JO. And from AWS, please welcome Henry Axelrod, Principal Partner Solutions Architect. Jo and Henry, thank you guys so much for being with us today. Looking forward to our conversation. Henry, let me start with you. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. It's well known and well accepted that hybrid cloud has numerous advantages, but organizations are at different points in their journey, their cloud journey. As you deal with your customers executing their hybrid cloud adoption strategies, what are 2 or 3 top challenges that they're encountering?
Great question, Wendy. So when I think about this, there's maybe 3 areas that I think are very common and that customers run into from a challenging perspective. One is similarity. Customers are looking to be able to have the same experience that they have, whether they're in a cloud environment or on-premise environment. But often there's different tools and services and resources available to them in each of those environments that can create a challenge when they're looking for a consistent experience between the two, or while they're running in a hybrid setup. The second, I would say, is visibility. Customers really look to have visibility across their whole environment. Often when they're working in a hybrid setup, they don't see it as, one environment or the other environment. Altogether, these environments are a single environment for a customer, and sometimes even a single workload across these environments. So having visibility is really critical to customers. The last one I would say is mobility, right? And this is really the ability for customers to be able to have their data and workloads be mobile between whichever environment that they are in their hybrid journey. So this may be different points in the life cycle, or this may be part of a application that some parts of it run in an on-premises setup, some parts run on AWS cloud, and customers want to have the ability to move workloads and data where they need it, when they need it.
All right. Thanks, Henry. Jo, let me bring you into the conversation. Along with those challenges that Henry just mentioned, we've also seen the rise of the cloud-native application adoption. And Kubernetes has been the de facto orchestration platform for containers. Why are we seeing this trend, and what additional burdens does the container adoption put on our enterprises trying to scale hybrid clouds?
So, thanks for that. I see, the start of that is developers. 95% of all new applications are being developed in containers. And so the explosion of the number of containers out there has caused, something like Kubernetes had to happen to orchestrate and manage it and do all that. And what that's done, though, is kind of created this whole new thing that everyone has to learn. And, we all experienced this 10 years ago, where we all learned VMware, we all learned vSphere, and now there's this whole new platform, and it does things in a different way. And there's things that come along with that, like security challenges. How do we address that? One of the things that I see daily is, because obviously I'm a little biased, but I deal with data. It's like, where does my data go? How do I treat my data? How do I get it from on-prem to the cloud, and all the pieces in between, or how to protect it? Like, a lot of times these projects, people will be developers starts it and says, I love containers, I'm going to run Kubernetes. And then the enterprise gets involved, and they say, well, how do you back it up? What's the DR plan? And none of that is really built in to Kubernetes. So somebody has to kind of create that.
All the while, like Henry said, providing a consistent and easy to use mobile instance. That's a lot. Yeah. Henry, building on Jo's response right there with his suggestions, his challenges, what level of adoption and enthusiasm are you seeing for Kubernetes amongst AWS users, and how has that impacted your strategy to meet those requirements from your customers?
Yeah, we see a lot of usage, and a lot of customers that are interested in containerized workloads. And in fact, the vast majority of containers running on the cloud run on AWS today. So we see customers that are using, our services, because we offer, multiple different services and ways for customers to run containers, whether that's through managed services like our EKS or ECS services, or even being able to run it in a serverless manner with Fargate. And from a strategy perspective, I think we try to incorporate these things into various offerings to help customers who are looking to containerize their workloads. And we have lots of customers, including Capital One, Fox Digital, Verizon, even General Electric, among many others, that are really starting to run their containerized workloads on AWS. So we need to ensure that we have all the services and features that those customers would require, and work with partners like Pure to provide some of those.
Interesting. Jo, with a heavy cloud native adoption, the storage and data layer becomes a critical consideration for the success of these types of customers. How can this become a stumbling block for some organizations that slows down app development and progress?
Well, I mean, one thing is kind of managing it in the kind of the traditional way. It doesn't really apply in Kubernetes, right? So if you're just like, I want to create a volume, and if you're doing that by hand, you're never going to keep up in that in that environment. So teaming with AWS, we work with their API, to automate all that, right? And so now, I just say, here's my app, I want this much storage, and it's handled, right? And that's the way it should be, and that's the way that everyone expects it to be in this kind of new world of containers. And so there's that, right? That is something that, because a lot of times some of these containers may spin up, write some data for a couple hours, and then go away. And you don't have enough people on the help desk to create those by hand, right? So it has to be done by software, and that's where we come in, where Portworx comes in with AWS. Especially I see a lot of customers in EKS, where, hey, we're going to install. We need to be able to protect that. To add on to that is be able to protect that data. I want to have it in the West region, here in the US, and maybe have a copy in the East, where now if something happens, like I mess it up, or something goes down, or internet connection gets cut, like everything, all the traffic goes somewhere else, and the same data is there. And building that by hand, is very hard for any enterprise to do. So we've built that service for you and put it right into AWS.
Sounds like we're better together, if you ask me. Henry, now that we know what organizations are up against, how are Pure and AWS working together to make it easier? Hybrid cloud, cloud native apps, data mobility. What do our joint solutions enable for our mutual customers?
Yeah, so as we think about that, as John mentioned, automation is certainly a critical aspect of that. Customers are looking to run their mission critical apps and highly scalable apps on solutions that Pure and AWS can provide together, provide high availability, to provide security, predictable performance, and also solve some of the challenges that we talked about earlier, like having a similar environment, being able to run, the same type of offering, whether you're running it on AWS or running it within your data center. For instance, Pure works with our AWS Outpost offering, which offers AWS services in on-premises location, and you can use Pure Array or a Flash Array or FlashBlade with those services as they've been validated. Even from a containerized perspective, working with Portworx and providing storage and high availability and disaster recovery, as well as data protection and mobility. So as we look at those kind of aspects and having the same visibility with things like Pure One working across those environments, we really see that customers are able to run pretty much any workload that they might need to in a hybrid setup, and have consistency across things that they're running on the AWS cloud or within their own data centers.
That's great. Jo, anything else you might want to add?
I just want to add like one quick comment, because in the case that someone doesn't already have all their workloads and containers in AWS, one of the things about Portworx is that it'll help you get there. If you're like, hey, I want to be in AWS, I want to get there, but I have all of this other infrastructure that I'm running today, or I'm running in some other cloud, right? Is that because Portworx is software, we can actually help build that data layer so that your data and your application, so not just replicate the data, but actually get the app itself into AWS when it's containerized, right? When it's on Kubernetes. So we're able to provide that on-ramp into the cloud for you if you're looking for that.
That's great. Guys, thank you so much. It's been a great, interesting discussion. And I know everyone appreciates your insights and expertise in this area. I think it's a challenge for many customers. And I know that if they are interested in discovering more, they can reach out to Pure Storage and AWS to figure out how we can help them achieve their goals. If you'd like to connect with us, please let us know. We can get you back on track and fly higher to meet your operational goals. You're sensing a theme here, I think, throughout. In the skies and fly higher. But thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, now it's time to bring on our special guest, Carey Lohrenz. Carey is a leadership expert who inspires audiences around the world to lead with courage and to be fearless. As the first female F-14 Tomcat fighter jet pilot in the US Navy, she's used to working in combat mission-ready environments where inconsistent execution could lead to catastrophic results. Please join me now in welcoming Carey as she shares her fascinating experiences and the tactics that helped her win in the cockpit and can help you and your team win in business.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Wendy. I really appreciate it.
Carey, I'm so glad you're here. I am honored and privileged to be speaking with you, the first female F-14 fighter jet pilot. It is an amazing experience. I've got goosebumps right now. We can't wait to get to the question and answer period, but I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So I'll let you take it away.
Well, I'm glad to be here and let's get mission ready. I am thrilled to be joining you all today, and I'm excited to take a few minutes to share with you some ideas on how you can continue accelerating into 2022, really leveraging some of those successes that you've already had and even becoming more mission ready. So one of the things I want you to consider as we spend some time together today is that even during a period of intense challenges or even crisis, to solve the trials of chaos and to make your goals and your customers' goals, dreams, and even those partner commitments come true, we have to understand that to succeed when the pressure is on and to even improve our performance, we have to know what we can and what we cannot control. So as you can imagine, the cockpit of an F-14 is really one of the most dynamic environments on Earth. And it's where I learned some of my most unforgettable lessons, not just in flying, but also in life and in leadership. In that time, I was spectacularly fortunate to work with some of the world's most outstanding teammates and some that provided coaching opportunities as well. Myself on more than one occasion, I promise you. But in both naval aviation and in business, whether you're in sales, you're an engineer, you're an account manager, or maybe you're on the exec team right now, we both are working in really highly complex environments with high pressure tasking in an environment that is constantly changing and it's challenging. So no matter your mission, people are counting on you, right? They're counting on you to make the right moves and the right decisions. So we're actually both working in fast-moving dynamic environments where inconsistent execution can really result in catastrophic results, but also where great partnerships and great wingmen matter. So no different than you, though, we had to figure out, how do you achieve the extraordinary? How do you achieve what can feel like really at times those impossible wins? And then at the same time, how do you lead yourself, your teams, your customers through this really fast moving dynamic time? Well, in my work and research over the last 2 decades, no parallel has asserted itself more clearly or more strongly than this one. High performing teams are going to require fearless leaders. And I found that there are 3 really fundamental traits that every fearless leader has: courage, tenacity, and integrity. But then what does that look like in action? Well, we need to be able to set a vision for our team, right? Align our team, create a culture where everyone is headed in the same direction, and then figure out a way to use really straightforward processes and even partnering habits where we can have fantastic execution while we're building resiliency into our systems. Because sometimes the bad stuff happens, right? And if we can be prepared for it, hopefully we'll be able to bounce back and come back stronger than had that bad thing not happened. I don't need to really be the first one to tell you that we are living in really remarkable times. But the biggest challenge and opportunity of the moment is learning how we can really overcome our circumstances instead of being overwhelmed by them. because leading yourselves, your teams, and your customers through uncertainty is tough, but with great partnerships and the right technology, it is possible. The ability to work through fear is what kept me alive as I operated in really dangerous conditions on and off of the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. But it's also what keeps any leader, any team relevant, respected, and moving forward. So if you are able to take some of that fear, some of that uncertainty, and shape it into something useful, you will become unstoppable. But what I'd like to do right now is take a second to invite you into my office, into the cockpit of a $45 million fighter jet. This is an environment that is not just mentally challenging, but it's physically challenging as well. And why is that? Most people don't realize that different than the other services, as Navy fighter pilots, flying on and off of the aircraft carrier is actually only part of our job. Unfortunately, we also have an additional full-time job in addition to that pilot role. So what do I mean by that? Well, as soon as we show up into our squadrons, we are put in a leadership position where instantly we are responsible in some way for leading and managing 250 to 300 people with assets valued at right around $1 billion. So I might start off as an educational services officer where I'm responsible for making sure everybody is getting trained, they're certified, they have a professional development plan. 3-4 months into that, as soon as I'm comfortable or getting more comfortable, I might swap roles. Now I might find myself as an assistant maintenance officer or an administration officer. Well, what's the problem with that? As you can imagine, we're constantly feeling overwhelmed, uncomfortable, and like we never have enough time or resources to get the job done. But at the same time, I'm responsible for all that fighter pilot stuff. So what does that look like? Well, I might be in month 9 or 10. Now I'm starting my second role or my third role. And yet every day I still have to go into a big room where I plan my mission. I go into yet another room where I brief my teammates, i.e. my wingman. Then I go into yet another space where I pull on about 35 pounds of flight gear. I go up to that flight deck, get into my airplane, and I am launched off the front end of the aircraft carrier going from 0 to over 200 miles an hour in just under 2 seconds flat. And within a couple of minutes, we're usually going 450 to 500 miles an hour, all the while leading 2, 4, 6, 8, maybe 20 wingmen safely to an operating area and then back to that aircraft carrier again. Now, why is that mentally challenging? Well, you would think that once we get into our cockpit that we can take a breath. Now we're in our safe space, right? But now all of a sudden I'm surrounded by about 350 switches and dials. I am talking and listening to people on 3 different radios at the same time that are oftentimes feeding me different information or disparate information, where I very, very quickly have to synthesize all of that data, sometimes conflicting data, and still I'm expected to make the best decision that allows us to achieve our mission objective. But at the same time, we're operating in this 3-dimensional battlefield in space where clearly we are trying not to hit each other, right? Or the ground or anything attached to the ground. And you might be thinking, well, okay, fancy fighter pilot, like don't hit each other. That can't be that hard. But there's a really strong physical element to that. So for example, right now we're all sitting here and we're experiencing 1G or 1 times the force of gravity. So if you weigh 200 pounds at 1G, you should still weigh 200 pounds, right? Or about, math is hard, 90 kilos. But when I'm in my airplane and I pull back on that stick, I can experience 6 to 8 times the force of gravity. So what that means is that instantaneously I go from feeling like I weigh 200 pounds-ish to about 725 kilos. That is like trying to think, fly, and talk and make decisions with an elephant sitting in your lap when you're feeling like you weigh about 1,600 pounds. Probably how you might feel on a daily basis sometimes with everything that's happening. But as much as I would like to think I have the most important job on this aircraft carrier, because I was a fighter pilot after all, and if you've met a couple of them, sometimes they do think that's the case, but it's not actually true. I am actually part of a high-performing team. And what's fascinating is that on this aircraft carrier, we have about 5,000 people on board. And yet every 9 months, about 50% of that population turns over. So what does that mean? Well, if you extrapolate that, that means every 18 months, you have an entirely new crew trying to get a job done in what's known as the world's most dangerous industrial worksite. That is an extraordinary operational challenge, right? An execution challenge, and definitely a leadership challenge. And as if that wasn't enough, the average age on an aircraft carrier is 19 to 19 and a half years old. And if that doesn't suck the air out of your lungs today, well, I've got nothing. But we're able to be successful in this environment because collectively we know our purpose. And it's one thing. As a team, we are focused on the safe launching and recovering of airplanes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Everything else is just details. And we pursue this together relentlessly. So all of the science actually shows us that one of the greatest challenges when we're operating in really complex or ambiguous environments is that the number one key to our success is going to be to have a similar sense of purpose. And that is going to be the single most important factor, not only in your individual success, but in your team's ability to be successful as well, and their ability to be mission ready, especially during times of overwhelm, especially during times of uncertainty. So we need to be really clear on not only being able to answer the question of who are we here for, but also being able to use that purpose as our anchor. And we have to be able to keep it simple. So we want to be really clear with what it is we want to accomplish, understanding that, really being able to articulate that simply will beat complexity every time. But know that it starts with you, that you are going to be the catalyst. So the catalyst, when we think about this on the aircraft carrier, with clarity of both vision and purpose, we all knew what success looked like. We all understood then the role that each and every one of us played in making that a reality. So whether your team is launching airplanes or you work in the public sector, maybe you're in the private sector, maybe you're an account manager or you're a VP, it's imperative that as an individual, you're able to really step up and provide that vision that then can empower your team, maybe your channel partners, and your customers to then achieve high performance. So going back to that catalyst piece though, a catalyst is somebody who can really accelerate reactions so that you get to where you want to go faster. In my world, obviously, speed is life, right? But in your world, the same thing applies. In times of crisis, in times of change, we not only have to be able to rapidly adapt, but understand that people need insight, right? And they need to really develop a unified experience and partners and relationships that they can trust. So understanding that all of our brains are wired to respond much more positively to both clarity and certainty, understand that you are going to be the catalyst then in moving that performance needle, in getting your customers, your teammates aligned towards that similar vision. Sounds easy, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to be the one that has the courage to show up in a way that makes that difference, right? Because how you show up matters. And this doesn't mean that all of a sudden, I don't mean all of a sudden you have to be like, oh, #blast, woo, happy to be here, right? But how you show up, the way you communicate is going to matter. It's not that a positive attitude guarantees your success, but a negative attitude kills your ability to adapt. And that is what is critical. So when we think about this, the things that in my world I found that really made what I would say common people like myself be able to achieve really extraordinary results in a pretty short period of time is that we were able to understand our purpose, we focused on what mattered, and then we could execute with discipline. When you are able to do that, and when you get your team together and get everybody aligned, we wanted to win, right? But that alignment is what becomes the fuel that can allow common but well-intended people to really achieve extraordinary results. Now, I will share with you one of the things that we used to say to each other as we would walk out to our airplanes. We'd do an eyeball check with each other, right? We'd look each other in the eyes and we would just say, hey, remember, no matter what happens out there today, if you lose sight, you lose the fight. If you lose sight of the most important work you should be doing, guaranteed to lose the fight. Doesn't matter how talented your partners are, how great your technology is. We have to know what that most important work is. But I want to take you back into my story for just a second, because I was drawn towards the Navy because I loved its focus on mission before self. And my path to becoming a naval aviator started at the Navy's Aviation Officer Candidate School, where you woke up to about 5 of these lovely young gentlemen hovering over your face every morning. Pretty soon, your mattress would be thrown out in the yard, followed by your uniforms. You might find yourself doing mountain climbers or jumping jacks in somebody else's pile of breakfast. So not in the marketing material. And pretty much you are questioning your life's choices on a daily basis. But everything that they were doing was designed to put an extraordinary amount of stress and pressure on you because they wanted to figure out, were you going to stay committed? Were you going to be able to be flexible and adapt and overcome any barrier that they would throw in front of you? And when the pressure was really on and they would tighten that vice of either psychological or even physical threat, would you still be able to make good judgments that were in the best interest of the team when maybe in this situation it became clear that it was not going to be in your personal best interest? Because that's pretty hard to do. And when the situation was changing, when they kept moving the goalposts, essentially, would you be able to step up and lead, fueled and empowered by that sense of purpose, and also based on the changing situations, based on the changing environment, not just on that plan that you might have written out a week ago or late last night or even crack of dawn this morning, but based on the current reality, because that plan may no longer be valid, right? But we know to be true over the course of time is that only those people who are able to remain flexible, who can continue taking action when they're enveloped in uncertainty, are the ones that will survive and inevitably thrive. So it's this idea of having the characteristic or the bias to take action and understanding that in times of change, it's that bold, fearless action that drives success. But it's going to be on you to have the courage to step up and take the opportunity. Now, here's where science comes back into play, thankfully. Action conquers fear. So our instructors knew that only a very small percentage of us would inevitably go on to fly high-speed fighters on and off of aircraft carriers. And what we can't afford to have happen is have my asset strapped into the US taxpayer $45 million asset and be 1,000 miles offshore at night. Suddenly I find myself on fire. And the only place I can land is back on that carrier. I can't come back to 10,000 feet of luxury, right? And so I don't have an easy button, and that can't be the time where all of a sudden I go, oh my gosh, I can't do this, right? This is too hard. So they put us in these situations where at some point in time, each and every one of us would be paralyzed by the fear of failure, because the fear of failure is actually one of the most universally paralyzing things that we all suffer from. fighter pilots included. And what happens is when we're pushed to our limits, when we are afraid to fail, we can tend to sit back and wait, right? And that fear of failure ends up being the single greatest obstacle to our success. Because while we're waiting, while we're worrying about if it's going to work, somebody else is willing to go first. Somebody else is willing to trust their teammates, trust their partners, and know that, hey, we're going to open the dialogue and we're going to figure it out. So things might not go according to plan. Oftentimes they don't, but don't worry about the setback. Don't fear that setback or that failure. It's how quickly you can learn from it together that ultimately determines not only what is possible for you, but your customers, your partners, your teammates as well. So I'm taking all of these lessons learned with me, these ideas of trust and teamwork and mutual support, and I'm headed off to flight school. And I know that I want to fly fighter jets, but there's a pesky law in place that says women cannot be assigned to tactical combat aircraft. And these airplanes are regarded as the ultimate assignment. And only those people with the very best grades even ever get the opportunity to get put in the training pipeline for them. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of roadblocks, a lot of setbacks along the way. And as this starts happening and the numbers of students start dwindling, either from grades or volunteer dropouts, I had to make the very intentional decision that regardless of the barriers put in front of me or those challenges, I stayed committed on trying to be the best teammate that I could be. I stayed focused on the mission, on that long-term goal of getting into a fighter jet, while I tried to continue to do the work that it required day to day, even in the face of some really insurmountable barriers. And this is where the tenacity piece comes into play. Because it's easy when you're not in the thick of it to talk about being gritty, to talk about staying tenacious. But it is going to take tenacity to keep pushing and striving and working hard when the novelty and the fun, exciting, decisive moment of taking that plunge wears off, right? When you're having to deal with all of the change and manage the change. So it's critical from a mindset perspective to constantly be working to see challenges as opportunities rather than as obstacles, and understand that in the midst of change, when you're making maybe some swap overs, just remember that courage, that initial thing that let's go do this, let's charge the hill, is going to be the 20-second sprint, but it's the tenacity piece that's the 5-hour marathon, right? You just can't get around it. But without the willingness to really keep at it, success in any way, shape, or form is just simply not going to be possible. So this is about staying tenacious, right? Staying gritty. And even sometimes in the face of change, when you're making these big moves, these bold moves, it's about finding a third way. It's about staying curious and asking questions and even sharing lessons learned, maybe outside of your channel, outside of your functional area, your unit. It's when you're able to do that, I promise you, acts of bravery do not always take place in the cockpit at Mach 2. They take place on our otherwise normal days when you have the audacity or the courage to honor your voice and your passions and share those lessons learned. So for me, when the rules changed then, when the law was lifted, the timing was perfect. It was on that day that my class was actually making their selections to figure out where they would go to the fleet. And so I was able to put my top choice on, which was the F-14 Tomcat. So the net of that ends up being, don't give up when there's still a possibility that you can be successful, right? Stay focused on your mission, stay committed to your strategy and to your customers, and then keep taking action, keep moving forward despite some fear and despite some uncertainty. Because again, I can promise you, you are going to run into turbulence, right? Things are going to get flipped upside down. You will feel vulnerable at times. There is no doubt. So I'm going to share with you a quick tool, though, that can help you overcome your circumstances instead of being overwhelmed by them. And it is this idea of what I call span of control. So this isn't from an org chart perspective. It's more of a mindset of how you go about business. So your span of control is really determined by the things that you can and should control at any given time, knowing that everything else is just a distraction. So it has three parts because as fighter pilots, again, we like to keep things simple, keep it clear. But the first part is this idea of focusing on what matters. The second thing is making sure you have a plan to go forward, that plan for success. And then the third leg of it is being able to communicate what's possible, not only for ourselves, for our teammates, but for our customers and even our partners that we serve and support as well. So in this really challenging environment, this idea of span of control is what allows us to cycle through this every day. That can be a game changer, and that sets us up for success. So let's talk about focus just for a hot second, though. Landing a high-speed fighter on an aircraft carrier at night is the hardest thing you can do in all of aviation. Your focus is, your attention is being dragged in 1,000 different directions as you come in and you approach that ship. And thanks to dedicated preparation and training, I know to prioritize and focus on only three things. And we call them meatball lineup angle of attack. Meatball is your optimal glide path. So whether you're high or low, lineup is actually really difficult to do on an aircraft carrier because that boat is always running away from you and the flight deck is at an angle, so that makes it even more challenging. And then angle of attack is different than other airplanes. We have to keep our airplane at the exact same angle going through the sky so we don't miss a wire when we try to land on the aircraft carrier. And all of this takes really extreme hand-eye shifting coordination, if you will, and actually the ability to resolve to hang in there no matter what happens. But I know, again, to focus on only three things. Otherwise, I'm going to become too overwhelmed and too distracted. So even when the circumstances are different, when they're more chaotic, more stressful, and more uncertain, my responses and actions are the same. So the next piece of this, though, is this idea of understanding how can we make a flight plan for success. I call it the prepare, perform, prevail system, where we always want to take the time on the front end to plan, right? Because we want the middle part, the execution, to be boring. But, and real quickly, the key is going to be making sure that we're taking the time to debrief. Why? Oftentimes, and I see this so often, even if it's with a new solutions rollout, or maybe it's a sales team, you're going and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we talk about this? But it's asking those questions, it's debriefing so that we are not leaving success to chance. So we're planning on the front end, right? Because we want to de-risk it. We want our execution to be somewhat predictable, but we're debriefing for success. So what happens then is that we're able to rapidly shift from problem to solution, which then increases our chance for success. So the reason we do this is that we want to uncover really the mechanics of success and failure again, so we're not leaving success to chance. So I'll put just a couple of questions up with the debrief. You can take a screenshot of it or write them down real quick. But what I want you to just remember is in that debrief, the idea is it's all based on the idea of it's not about who is right, it's what's right. And what we want to be able to do is, again, figure out what's working and what's not, so that we can keep up with the pace of change in the environment and hopefully then go further faster, right? Debriefing is going to take some practice, but taking this time to debrief will actually end up giving you time back because it's going to tamp down some overthinking, second guessing, and it actually then builds in resiliency within your team, within yourself, and even with the way that you go about doing business. So it's a really transformative step in leading through uncertainty really swiftly and aggressively. Because again, at the end of the day, we don't want to leave success to chance. So all of this, again, if we flip it back real quick, is just about your span of control, right? focusing on what matters, making that flight plan for success, and then communicating what's possible. So, Wendy, I think we have a chance. I know I kind of got through that fast. I think we have a few minutes here to go through some Q&A if we want to go through a couple of questions. And if I don't get to your questions, connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll answer them there. I'll throw you a message back.
Thank you, Carey. It's awesome. I have like 2 pages worth of notes that I'm like, I need to go home and teach my kids and teach my team. It's awesome. But thank you so much for sharing your stories. It's really an amazing experience. We do have some questions from the audience. So if you're okay, I'm going to read through some of those. And then I've got some rapid fire questions as well. Lots of things to get through. So question number 1, what advice do you have for young women, young girls who have similar aspirations about excelling in a role that's typically dominated by males?
Okay. So loaded question. It's not easy, but it is possible. My short answer would be know your value and don't play small. One of the things that I hear oftentimes is that don't worry, just perform. Your performance is the only thing that matters. I am going to hard push back on that, because if you think only your performance matters, you're missing a big piece of the picture. Generally speaking, men are actually relentlessly always advocating for themselves. It's not a bad thing. It just kind of is what it is, right? So while your performance does matter, indeed it does, because it allows people to advocate for you. You have to be able to get your job done, right? Competency does matter. But you have to understand that you are going to need to raise your hand before you feel ready. So my big piece of advice would be for women and for even young girls, every single time, raise your hand before you're ready. And don't wait for an invitation to make a difference, because it may not come, right? Raise your hand before you're ready. And if you feel like you need an invitation to make a difference, let this be it.
So you referred to, thank you, and I wanted to take notes as we're going through that, but you referred to the law changing, which allowed you to then become a fighter pilot in the plane that you really wanted to, the F-14 Tomcat. How do you think the change in the law has affected the Navy over time?
Well, I think it's tough. I think the Navy itself has a pretty tough culture. I think what it has done, though, broader, is that even in the different services, it's kind of opened up the aperture of what's possible. What is fascinating to me, and the one thing that I never understood when I first started, because in my mind, and I always said this, I don't understand what all the drama is about, because the jet doesn't know the difference. Flying a fighter jet is a very technical skill. Yes, there are physical elements to it as well, but the job itself is a really technical skill. So, and what we had forgotten as a country was that the WASPs, the Women Air Force Service Pilots, had flown almost 2 million flight hours in the 40s. So in my mind, I was like, haven't we already settled this discussion, this disagreement? But what it did end up doing was it ended up opening the door for a lot of different jobs within not only the Navy, but the other services as well. So submarines, certain intel jobs, some special operations jobs, places where women might have been being assigned temporarily, but it wasn't their actual job description. So I think it did kick open the door in a lot of different areas to say, hey, we need to be able to pull from the most talented, the biggest pool of talented people we can, and we're missing a piece of that if we're saying a certain group can't be a part of it.
It's great. It's insightful. It's exciting too to see that change and to harken back to the 40s when women were already doing it. So thank you for leading the way with that. Talking a little bit about anxiety, you talked about stress and how to work through your fear. How do you deal with your anxiety or fear? Do you have any tricks? You talked a little bit about that, but how do you deal with it when you're going to an unknown terrain or route, something you're not familiar with?
Right. So this goes back to that relentless preparation piece, which is accessible for all of us. And too often, especially we can find people that have some tenure or some experience can settle a little bit into some complacency because they are performing still at a pretty high place. But it's that relentless preparation and training in planning, in preparation, and for us in simulators and flights, all of that. It's the only way you can translate new knowledge is going to be into action. But this goes back to understand science proves action conquers fear. So if you've done the preparation, if you've taken the time to learn as much as you can, don't fear taking that first step, but be open to making some mistakes, be open to being wrong, and definitely raise your hand if you have a question or if you don't understand something. So the only thing to kind of deal with that is to know that action conquers fear. And if you've done the preparation, reframe it in your mind and don't think I'm afraid or, oh, I'm so anxious about this, or I don't want to stand up in front of 5,000 people and have to talk about this. Say, I'm excited. I've prepared. I'm excited. Let's go.
Got it. Working through that fear. Okay. So you talked a little bit, I read in your bio that you were a rower and you spent a lot of time in a 2D environment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked about the 1G. How did you learn and come to understand, overcome, I guess, your 2D environment to understand a 3D environment, three-dimensional flying? You know, is that something that you're born with? Did you learn it? Is it simulator? What did you do?
Yeah, I don't know if you're born with it. Some people might be able to have a little better spatial orientation than others. But at the end of the day, for us, you don't start off flying a fighter jet, right? You don't start off landing on the aircraft carrier. You start off sitting at a desk, learning about clouds, learning about aerospace, learning about hydraulics, which for me is not spectacularly interesting, but it's a life-saving skill or piece of knowledge. So it's all building blocks. So when somebody looks way ahead or looks at the final result and thinks, I could never do that. Well, you're not going to go from here to there. It's having that, I think, actually the cognitive ability or flexibility and humility to be able to start from ground zero and be willing to not know, be willing to make mistakes. And then it's just day by day. And on those days when you don't think you're going to be able to make it or you're just too overwhelmed, it's also being able to just get in the moment and say, I can make it until lunch. And if you can learn one thing before lunch that you can apply, then it's just the constant that then through simulators, then through step by step, build the skill set. That's how you do it. I think too often right now, whether it's social media or otherwise, people are, the 9 life hacks, the 8 easy steps to high performance. Yeah. Well, the Olympics are coming down the chute. You let me know if you could do 8 easy steps to the triple half pipe, right?
Yeah. It's not quite as easy as the life hacks, right?
Right. It takes it for all of us. It takes work and it takes the ability to look foolish and to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to read this question because I think it has a little bit to do with kind of who you are at the core and how you fought through some of those hurdles and obstacles. But it says, I assume you're somewhat of a risk taker to want to challenge the status quo as a female jet pilot. But when did you really first notice that it was time to push outside the lines? You were a child? Were you an adolescent? Was there something that clicked and said, yes, I'm going to go for it? Or was it gradual?
So it's such a great question. And unfortunately for my brother, I have a brother who's just a year older than me, who I followed in his footsteps. If he played hockey, I wanted to play hockey, right? If he did this, I wanted to do that. And and we were just not even quite a year apart. So, I feel like I was on his coattails quite a bit. But I remember when I was about 11 years old, my dad, who was a Marine Corps aviator and then flew for the commercial airlines, took my brother and I both down to a really big air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And it was there that I actually met one of the women Air Force service pilots. Wow. And I had thought, I wanted to fly, and it just seemed like that's what everybody did. That's what my dad did. My brother was super interested in it. But yet, as I walked around this air show of tens of thousands of people, I didn't see any women pilots. And I'll never forget even driving back and saying to my dad, I think I'd want to do that. But I, whenever you say, oh, I want to be a pilot, people go, oh, girls don't do that. And my dad I remember my dad used to always say to me, just remember the people who tell you you can't or you won't are usually the ones most afraid that you will. So you take kind of that really quiet support. And I think even the way I'm wired, I don't know, math wise, if it's 51%, I'm more afraid of not taking a chance than living with regret. Doesn't mean that I don't have a pit in my stomach when I go for it. Doesn't mean I don't have a little bit of verb or my back gets sweaty where I'm like, ugh. And certainly I try to de-risk things. But again, at some point in time, you have to be able to trust yourself that you've done the work, you've done the preparation, and now you have to be the one to take action. Or someone else is going to be sitting in your dream job. Somebody else is going to be working with your preferred partner because you were too afraid to make the ask. And what a loss that would be.
It's great. It's great advice. Great advice. So, okay, a couple of rapid fire questions as we come towards the end. What was your call sign?
Vixen. Just a 1X though, so it made it through most spam filters.
That's good. What was your most rewarding part of your job?
100% working with the people. I mean, it's of course flying this amazing airplane going Mach 2 with your hair on fire is amazing, but working with the people and watching people, young kids from all different backgrounds grow and develop and go on to achieve success. Wow. It's the heart is what makes it awesome.
That's good. That note that you said about the average age on an aircraft carrier, 19 and a half, that took my breath away too. Oh boy. Should the Navy have kept and updated the F-14?
Without question. Absolutely. It had great range. It had all of the technology in place. It would have been much more affordable option. But that decision was well above my pay grade.
Right. That decision was made for you.
That's right.
Are you going to go watch the new Top Gun movie when it comes out?
Oh my gosh. Every time I see that Paramount's decided to push it back again, I slide into a tiny depression and I'm like, come on. Tom Cruise's kids are going to have kids by the time that thing launches. So
true.
I will be first in line. You bet I will be.
Well, that was definitely from my era. So you hear that music and you can't help but get excited. So another question, do you play volleyball on the beach just like they did?
Yeah, but I kept my shirt on.
That's good. We appreciate that. We definitely appreciate that. Listen, Carey, it's been fantastic getting to know you a little bit and, listening to all that you have to say and your guidance and your, inspiring thoughts and steps. I took a ton of notes. I'm going to definitely take this home and think about it. So thank you so much for spending the time with us. Really, truly.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Really glad to be here. Thank you so much.
I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. The panelists, thank you again to Jo and to Henry. Our partnership with AWS and between AWS and Pure is really important for delivering those hybrid cloud solutions to our mutual customers. And thank you again to Carey. Really special that the inspirational messages she delivered today. I know I'm going to take those home and think about those. I really want to say thank you again to the audience and for joining us for an hour out of your day. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time, and we hope to hear from you soon. So thank you. Thank you to our channel partners as well. We couldn't do it without you. And thank you to the audience.